My great pleasure to introduce our son Charles McKay, who will be followed by Linda Bunn. Now Charles and family now live up inland from Byron Bay, a place called Clunes, and they have two children, and the second one was born on the 7th of March this year in Lismore Hospital. If she was born on the 1st of March, they wouldn't have been able to get the hospital. And the interesting thing, she's known as Poppy. Her name is Poppy. Mum was known as Poppy as a youngster. We didn't know that until Anzac Day when these ones were with us. Here we are. Charles.
Thank you. Hello everyone, thank you everyone for taking the time out to celebrate Nana's amazing life. For those of you who don't know me, I'm one of the 8 grandchildren that were lucky enough to call Mrs. McKay, Helen, Nana. Annabelle, Bianca, Woody, Zach, Matthew, Daniel and Phoebe and myself. So, some words that I came up with that I remember Nana. Horses, lots of them. Cattle, sheep, abundance of energy. Cats and dogs, always seem to be more cats turning up all the time. Chops and mashed potato. Sausages. Cups of tea. David Attenborough was always on the telly. Mustering sheep. Dressage and show jumping. Breaking in horses. Bees. Many a sting of bees for me. Chopping wood. Lots of wood. Roses. Lots of roses in the garden. The garden was a big passion. Leaving gates open. Yeah, that would be me. Reading books to me. Lots of books. I'm not a very good reader, but it was something that Nana loved to do for me. Nothing was a problem. Everything was no worries. Rhubarb. Boxing bobs of sheep. That'd be me again. Mercurochrome. Dryzabone. Nana needs hay. Lots of hay. Silver, the Shetland, and we would all remember her. Miracle, the old horse. Pro-night sandwiches. The cattle yards, and very generous with her time. And she was obviously extremely wise. So when I was thinking about what to talk about today, outside of those words, the theme that came up is what does it take to become a centurion? And for those of you who do not know, there's a thing called the Blue Zones, and the Blue Zones are in Japan, Sardinia, Italy, Costa Rica, Greece, and part of California, and that is definitely not the Western Districts of Victoria. So the themes that are around the Blue Zones are, there's 4 of them: moving, having a right outlook on life, eating wisely, and connection. So breaking them down, there's 10 things, and I want to talk to a few of them. So first one is move naturally. So what that means is Nana definitely was not getting up in the morning and doing yoga and lifting weights, but her whole life and lifestyle was around moving. And to give you an understanding, I think it was when Nana was 70, we're in Mortlake, and we're mustering cattle, and it was torrentially wet and boggy, and Nana was leading the charge, cutting out a bull, I believe, and cracking the stock whip at 70. So that gives you an understanding of how athletic she was. The next one is having a purpose. So for Nana, without a doubt, it was the connection with the land and the animals and the community that she lived in. That definitely was what got her out of bed in the morning. And it goes into the moving naturally. There was always something to do for those horses. The next one is what's called the downshift. So this is the stress. So I don't actually remember seeing Nana stressed. I have a story that I have when outside of boxing all the sheep. But I got headbutted by one of Nana's horses once, and I ran at her screaming with a lot of expletives about I was going to shoot all her horses. And at the time, there was nothing wrong. She's like, "What's wrong, darling?" And anyway, we got in the car and we were driving up to Mum and Dad's, and I think she was a bit nervous about dropping me off with half my lip missing. And she said on the way up, she's like, "I hope you cursed at those horses, Charles." And I said, "No, of course I'd never swear around you." But I obviously did. The next one is the 80% rule. So this is how much food you eat. So going to Nana, it was pretty simple. It was chops or sausages, some mashed potato, and some veggies. And that was, everything in moderation. So if you ever went to Lake Wallach and had dinner at Nana's place, it was pretty simple, but it obviously worked. And going into the next one is the plant is a moderation of the diet. So, Nana's food was pretty simple. She cooked obviously a lot of it. A lot of it was made on the farm. The next one, which Nana definitely didn't do, was having wine at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So I think Nana may have replaced her wine with tea, because you can drink tea at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you can drink it all day as well. The next point is belonging, so having some sort of faith. And I think for Nana, this was the horses again. Like, it was that connection with the land and having something that she absolutely obsessed over. The next point is loved ones first. So I couldn't comprehend the time that Nana would have put herself first. All the stories that you will hear or have seen or heard, it's about helping other people, and even to the level of when she had the opportunity to leave the farm to go to, I think it was to go to England, and of course she couldn't, because who was going to look after the horses? And then the next point is the right tribe. So it sort of goes to the similar thing, having the right people around her, the family and the horses that connected her to obviously the land. So when you start thinking about those things and to live to 100, it's a pretty remarkable effort, and to do that in the era that she did. A final thought for me is that Nana was an absolute rock. Everyone has had people they lean on, and like Linda said, she was a mentor without really knowing that. So she will live on. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. That was great. And Charles will be ably followed by a dear friend, Linda Bunn, who Mum has known most of the time since moving up here. Not all of the time, but most. And I'm not going to say any more. Linda and Philip live in town. Well, I will say, Linda is a retired GP from near Alexander Philip rather, led an extraordinary life and practice, and Linda was the practice manager, nurse, and she could tell thousands of nurse stories, but she's not. She's going to talk for 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you, Linda. And Linda doesn't rehearse. This is straight off the cuff.
If I'm a bit waffly today, I'm sort of fighting a bit of background, so I will. Thank you, David. It's a great honour, actually, to be able to chat to you today, being one of Helen's newer friends. And I look around the room and I sort of know a few faces, and Sally, of course, but Helen and I really hit it off, didn't we? And we had some wonderful times together. I would drive up to Stanley and pick Helen up, and I'd have a flask of tea and some sandwiches and a bit of cake, and as Philip would, sorry, I'm not nervous, I'm just dizzy from the pain.
You want to sit down?
I might have to sit.
We'll move the lectern, and you sit here in this chair. I'll move the lectern out of the road.
Sorry about that, though. Because I dearly loved Helen's company, and we'd drive along, and she chatted a lot, of course. So I didn't get to say very much at all. And I had no sense of direction, and I relied on Helen knowing where we were and how to get back. Otherwise, I'd still be out there. But we really did have some lovely times. But what did I learn from Helen? She was very much like my own mother, and I think that's why we got on so well. My mother was married to a farmer, and I grew up in a similar situation, I suppose, to Helen, when you always live in a country area, and you make your own fun. And the thing didn't have in common with Helen was horses. I'm terrified of them, which is really rather silly because my father had at least 6 horses all the time, and twice he said to me, "You've got to learn to ride, Linda." "I don't want to, I'll ride a bushbag." "No, you've got to learn to ride a horse." So I thought, well, I'll stop this nonsense, so I deliberately fell off. And each time, never to have to get back on again.
That's what you did.
Oh, is it?
No, Clem fell off 7 times in one day. She must have
It's the way to do it, otherwise they say, no, it's just a matter of confidence. You know, your knees in. Well, my knees were up over the horse's back, and I could never reach the stirrups. So Dad said, well, you've got to get used to riding bareback and hang on to the mane. How silly, he went straight up the horse's head. Anyway, so I didn't have horses in common with Helen, but I had a lot of other things in common with her. We're both nurses and passionate rural folk, and I mean that I've always admired tremendously country women. And when I think of Helen and my mother and the privations that they had, that they didn't really consider privations. They didn't have modern conveniences. They didn't complain. They just got on with it. And I think this is part of their success. It was not a matter of, oh, what do I want to do today? It's what do I have to do today? And they just simply got stuck into it. Whether it was washing, you know, over a tub and one of those dolly things that you put clothing through. It all seems really, really very, very hard, and it was manual work. But at the same time, even though the men were supposedly the head of the household, very rarely worked that way. And Helen said, no, they were that in name only. So she had that in common with my mother's. And we had these lovely little chats. She was very adamant, pragmatic, you would say. No grey, it was black or white, wasn't it, with Helen. And she had a remarkable memory, not just for trivia, but for all things, didn't she? We'd be driving along and she'd look at, oh, Linda, just look at that cliff face, and then that belongs to this, and that joins this, you know, and I'd have this little lecture on geology and geography as we drove along. But it was really wonderful because her mind delighted in so many things. Oh, look at that tree, look at that Linda, things that most of us wouldn't notice. But when I was with Helen, it was like being with a child. You know, when you take children for a walk, oh, look at that pebble, look at this. And with Helen, it was the same. You felt uplifted, you felt sort of revived. She was quite remarkable, and I absolutely loved her company. She had some, I won't call them odd ideas, but they were definitely Helen's ways. Why would you waste your time in reading a novel? Why do people read novels? They're just nonsense, she said. I only want facts. So that was all right. We didn't discuss novels after that. I did not read myself. But this was part of her personality. She was straight, and you can just see her in her youthful marriage years, getting up thinking, I've got to get this for the children, I have that to do. And instead of thinking, oh no, they just did it. This is what amazed me about my mother when I look back. I mean, nowadays, with our modern conveniences, we get up, well, we wash today, oh no, we'll go and have coffee with our girlfriends. They didn't do any of that, and yet at the same time, their life was so fulfilling. And this is difficult to explain when there were so many hardships, and they didn't have time out, say, once, twice a week to have lunch with friends, and if they did, they'd be preparing the lunch and they'd be coming to visit you. It was a different thing, as my father-in-law used to say, say to me, you women don't know how lucky you are. You can go off and play tennis whenever you like. I mean, such a silly remark. and Helen would say, yes, men are like that. And she said, they've always liked to think they're head of the household. My mother instructed me, just go along with it, Helen. You don't have to believe it, just go along with it if you want a quiet life. So that's the way that things were with her, and I think with my own mother, which is why we bonded so well. She was a remarkable person. I miss her dearly, and we developed a very close friendship. I think because we had so much in common, even though there was this age gap, I understood her life because of my mother's life. She didn't really have to explain anything. I knew where she was at any time in her married life with small children, trying to cope. And then I said to her one day, Helen, we must share some recipes. Yes, Linda, we'll do that. You know, on Christmas Day, I cooked the dinner, they'd be hay making, and I'd have to take it all down